Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Physics Circles Lab Setup video. So before we talk about the specific lab that we're going to run in our next class, I wanted to tell you generally how we're going to do setups and lab analysis. So instead of doing a whole lab report, we're going to make sure to contain everything that we do inside our lab notebooks. So it's going to take 2 pages of the lab notebook, and it's best if they're side by side, just so you can see the whole lab at one time. So just the general structure, we're going to have a title, we're going to ask a question associated with every lab, and every question is going to take the form of what is the relationship between one variable and another variable. Because in science, we like to look at the relationships between variables. Just to help us remember what was going on, or to help us show somebody else if they were absent or were interested, we're going to have a sketch and a procedure, which is not going to be just like the whole thing. It's just kind of going to be a summarized version to let us know what we did, just kind of as a little reminder. And then obviously we're going to gather our data, and then the thing that we're going to do with our data is we're going to analyze it. One of the easiest ways to analyze data, or most useful ways, it may not be the easiest, but it's probably the most useful, is to graph the data. And then it's not just enough to graph it, then we also have to analyze or interpret that graph and interpret the meaning of that data to answer our original question: what is the relationship between the two variables? So this is going to function as your lab report. It's all going to be in your notebook, and it's only going to ever be those 2 pages. And for this first one, we're going to guide you through it step by step by step, starting with the first step. So to get ready for the circles lab, which we're going to run in our next class, we are going to title the page in our lab notebook Circles Lab, because it's a lab involving circles. And then we have to start with probably the most important part of the lab, which is the question. This is why we are looking at this lab. So the question, as I said, always takes the relationship. What is the relationship between one variable and another variable? And in this case, it would be for a circle. So instead of just giving you the answer to that question, I'm curious what kind of things that you are curious about investigating for a circle. So in our next class, I'm going to give you a wide variety of circles. And so here you can see a bunch of different circles. Obviously, this is a cup, but we can trace the circle of the top of the cup. Here are some smaller circles and bigger circles. So the question that I want you to think about now, and I would even ask that you pause the video to think of some answers to this question, is given all of these different circles, what can we measure about those circles? So pause the video now and write down at least 3 or 4 things that we could measure about each of these circles that might make an interesting experiment. So the reason why I asked you to pause the video to start thinking about it is because the question is, what can we measure? And so in order to sort of clarify that question a little bit, I wanted to provide a definition, which is a commonly misunderstood thing. So you might have said that we could measure the diameter using a ruler, and then we could use the formula that we know from math class. I think you multiply by pi or something to get the circumference. But what I wanted to tell you was that there is a difference between calculations and measurements, and I need you to know the difference between those 2 terms. So just to give you a quick definition of each, you could probably think of what the difference is. A calculation is anything that involves a mathematical function. So if I say multiply by 2, that is a calculation. So maybe some of the things that you said that we could measure were actually calculations. And a measurement is anything that we can read off a measurement tool, like a ruler or a protractor or a stopwatch or a scale. So with that in mind, I want you to go back and rethink about what can we measure in this situation and how would we measure it? So again, pause the video and make sure that you have at least 2 or 3 or 4 answers to that question coming into the next class, because that will be the foundation of the conversation that will be our warm-up in the first 5 minutes of class. Is we have to decide what 2 variables we want to measure about these different circles. So go ahead and do that now. And actually, that's going to wrap up my video. As long as you come to our next class thinking of several variables about the circles that you want to measure, then that's going to kickstart our conversation, and it's going to allow us to dive right into the circles lab. So I'm looking forward to seeing you then. And until then, go Bears.